Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Healthtech Podcast, brought to you by the team at SomX. I'm Huw, and today I'm joined by my colleague Belle, and we're going to run through the week's best health tech stories, or at least some of them, so you don't have to. Belle, how's your week been?
It's been good, Huw. Thank you. I'm coming fresh, well, it feels fresh-ish off a 2-week holiday, even though actually I've been back at work for a week and a half now, but it's ramping up, is what I can say. Definitely feels like everyone's got their back to school hats on.
It is ramping up, isn't it? September, October seems to be a busy time for the health tech world, which can only be good news, let's be fair.
Yeah, it's true. Although I will say, as our resident Edinburgh resident, it is bloody freezing. I'm so cold, and I cannot believe it's not even October yet.
And of course, next week it gets even busier as the tech and startup world gets super excited for Sifted Summit. A shout out for the Healthtech Pigeon official Sifted Summit meetup. Always excited to do an event in partnership with Sifted. Last year, we did a fantastic meetup for the health tech community and did a wonderful panel to discuss the benefits of AI. This year, you get to skip my ramblings on the topic and poor hosting and join us at a meetup party the night before the summit. So super excited for that as well.
My main question here is, we're branding it Healthtech Pigeon, so have we finally bought a pigeon suit, and will there be a pigeon in attendance?
You will have to attend, and I know that you're Edinburgh based, so you won't be there, so you can't ever guarantee it. Listeners will have to come and find out to know whether that's the case.
Maybe I'll just start wearing one around Edinburgh. People are like, what the hell is going on?
Repping the pigeon team north of the border. Our first story this week comes to us from National Health Executive, and that is that digital mental health therapies could save thousands of NHS therapist hours. This is a new analysis from the UK's National Institute for Health and Care Excellence that has looked at a number of NICE approved treatments that they've already been through and reviewed and assessed for their value to their health system for conditions including depression, stress, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Currently recommending, NICE is currently recommending 7 digital therapies to treat depression and anxiety disorder in adults, and they've looked at other technologies as well. And this, to building, I guess, on some of the assessments that they've already done, they've explored, I guess, the potential impact of what digital mental health therapies could actually do. And in this case, they said that there's quite a significant impact, actually, in terms of the potential for saving time for NHS therapists if these technologies are used. A lot of the times, these therapies are naturally recommended for use alongside clinician intervention as well. But in a number of the health technology assessments that have already been already reviewed these, and in some of the assessments that and in some of the analysis that NICE has put forward this week, they're looking at the quite significant backlog of mental health appointments in the UK and the quite large waiting lists. And I guess, as everyone knows, early intervention is so important in mental health, and the Talking Therapies program is designed to ensure that people can access this, but it's not always straightforward to do so, and it's not always easy to do so, given the waiting lists that exist. So NICE has crunched the numbers, shall we say, looked at the referrals so far received over the last few years, and the number of referrals continues to grow. In 2023 to 2024, numbers of referrals from NHS Talking Therapies were well above 1.8 million, which is quite significant. And it's indicative of a continuing trend. Last year was the only year where we've seen a fall since at least 2012, if not before as well. And those numbers have gone up from under 1 million in 2012 to that 1.8 million figure now. In order to address this backlog, it's obviously important to make sure that the time that therapists are spending is not minimized, but used as efficiently as possible. And these digital therapies, NICE believe, certainly could help make that happen as well. So, Belle, what are your thoughts on this? There's some interesting takes here and interesting figures, but I think it's ultimately showing that there's some real benefit to digital mental health therapies, and it could have a really positive impact on the system.
Yeah, definitely. And I think seeing this number grow and grow year on year is indicative of multiple things. One of which is the backlog's growing and people are looking elsewhere for how can I actually get the treatment that I need right now instead of waiting for however many years on a mental health waiting list. But it's also showing an increasing comfort with digital technologies, like something called talking therapy. I'm sure however many years ago is not something that people would have thought, oh, I'd like to go for that. It would have seemed like something which they might use if they didn't have a choice. But now that is the choice that they can make. And especially with some of the mental health conditions that are mentioned here, and they're kind of specifically talking about, which is depression, stress, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. These things don't just have what you mentioned, which is that early intervention element, which is so important that we get people on treatment as soon as possible, but also have an element where people sometimes might feel embarrassed about going to seek help. They might struggle to talk about their certain problems with a therapist that they see in person. So for those people, and that's certainly not everyone, this also offers an alternative route for those people that would struggle with more traditional face-to-face. And actually that sort of relative anonymity, as anonymous as you can be when talking about your mental health, gives them sort of an extra positive in order to get them on the therapy that they need as soon as possible. And I think maybe another reason why we're seeing those numbers grow is we don't have that sort of hurdle of embarrassment that some people have to go over when they go to their doctors and say, look, I'm struggling and I need to talk to someone. And that's such a huge step for people struggling with a mental health disorder that I think, and I hope that it's not just how people talk about these more openly, because I think everyone's more open with their mental health now, and that can only be a good thing, but they're also more open about how they access that therapy and how they access that support. So I think this is really encouraging. And yeah, what incredible numbers, really. And it's great, like, within the NHS, we're so lucky that we do have this analysis that's done rather than just saying this seems to have gone well. I know the NHS has its problems. There are certain elements of fragmentation within it, but we do often have this kind of national level analysis, which really shows the impact of technologies such as this, which I think is really cool too.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, as I think people are more willing to talk about their mental health and be more engaged with it, I think that's become really significant benefit. And then people are referred for talking therapies and they simply can't access it, which it's good that people are engaging. It's sad that they can't necessarily access the help that would be valuable. And I think, and we can probably come on to the evidence discussion in a minute for some of these technologies, because I think that I've read some of the health technology assessments for these therapies in the past for different conditions, and yeah, there's some mixed levels. I don't think NICE would recommend technologies that it didn't think had real positive benefit and real clinically measurable benefit. And I think you do see that in a number of the recommendations they've made in bringing these technologies to market, or bringing these technologies to the NHS at least, and recommending their use. Some definitely, some of these technologies, not the ones that have been approved, but that have been assessed, definitely didn't meet the evidence threshold, and so weren't in those that were approved. I think ultimately, though, there's some fantastic numbers attached to this. In terms of the clinical hours savings based on the use of these technologies, that shows how valuable they really could be. So just breaking down some of the figures in the article, digitally enabled therapies for anxiety disorders could potentially save around 6,000 therapist hours per 1,000 people in NHS talking therapies in England. For depression, that's 6,800 therapist hours could be saved. PTSD, the digital therapies could save over 5,000 hours of therapist time per 1,000 people, and almost 2.5 therapist hours per 1,000 people for social anxiety. And I think that's those are absolutely fantastic numbers, and I think really indicative. Like if they can have that benefit and help save clinical time so that it can be maximised and there for the people who need that help urgently, and most importantly, then I think it's going to be big. It's, their use is going to have a really positive impact generally.
Where are they getting those numbers from? Is it a case of digital therapies are freeing up kind of administration? It's freeing up referrals, which means that for every appointment with a new person, you're having to sort of do the intro again, and so you're not getting to the crux of the matter straight away? Is it just a case that people are getting therapy earlier and so needing a shorter course over kind of a certain period because they're getting that access to treatment earlier? Do you know? Does it say?
So I think a lot of it is a mix in terms of what hours are being saved and where. So, I mean, nice to say that the actual, very clear caveat here, the actual number of hours saved will depend on the proportion of patients who opt to use digital therapies and, who complete their courses as well. A lot of these are, I guess, online apps and materials and courses that must be used with the support of a trained practitioner or therapist, but don't necessarily have to be used, in their office. And it does sub out for some of the hours that without these services, without these platforms, without these therapies, you would have to have in-person consultations or discussions with your therapist. And you'd have to, there'd be the waiting times, there'd be the clinical consultation times and parts of that. So I think I think the idea is that these services kind of reduce the face time of the patient, but also some of the admin time around it as well. And that's where the savings come from. Again, though, that caveat of it will depend on the actual proportion of patients who opt to use them. You can't force people to, and obviously there's, as with any other therapy for mental health or otherwise, there's the adherence and completion point, and it's something that pops up in the evidence a lot in the health technology assessments. It's sort of how many people did complete the courses of therapy of these digital therapies. So
there's also the element as well, isn't there, where even if you do have lots of people opting into things such as talking therapies, there's still sort of the limiting factor of number of therapists and number of hours. Like, even if that therapist is able to see more patients in their time because it's taking less time per patient, because it's, being made shorter and more efficient through technology such as this, there is still a limiting factor at the end of the day. And until we either get more therapists, make more hours in the day, or find an alternative, that's going to continue to be an issue.
Yeah, there's definitely the wider problem.
Yeah, and there are some technology companies that are trying to overcome this by producing technologies which use LLMs and chat interface sorts of things, so that there's actually even less of that therapist's time needed. And whether or not we'll see more of that, but again, it's the adherence problem. It's got to, when you're talking about your mental health, you've got to have often that human relationship so that you feel confident and comfortable sharing your feelings. And so how digital can you go in order to actually keep making those efficiency gains, rather than getting over a hump and seeing the inverse, where you start to see people actively choosing not to use that because they're not feeling that personal connection?
Yeah, definitely. There's one aspect that the NICE analysis, I think, touches on, which is a nice point that we've maybe not considered, is it's not all necessarily about clinical hours with these technologies. It can be about the accessibility of the services. If you are, I think, very, you pointed out the kind of the challenge and the simple, I guess, difficulty accessing these services. It's not necessarily, it's not always about, the availability or the I guess the time of the therapist that you want to speak to. It can be about how far away they are from you. And I think some of these therapies that allow people to at least, take part in some of their therapy, remotely or in home, I think will be hugely valuable for, if you don't live close to therapists, or the need to engage with talking therapy isn't necessarily possible, if you're far away or absolutely live far away from a mental health treatment.
Yeah, because it could not just be that it's a 45-minute trip to the hospital or whatever. For example, they talk about PTSD here. I'm from Cornwall. I'm pretty sure the closest PTSD specialist is in London. I'm pretty sure. I'm I mean, that might not be the case now, but I'm pretty sure at least at some point that was the case, which is absolutely mental because there's a huge cost associated with that. What, does someone want to spend £100 plus round trip to go to hospital and then probably have to stay overnight, which is another 100 odd quid? And then you've got to book the days off work, which is all that time. And then maybe you want some support while you're up there, so you're having to bring someone else along because you feel like there are so many things at play in accessing that. And that's before you even get onto the mental load of someone who's already under mental strain.
Exactly. Well, I think it's clear that these technologies are going to be hugely valuable. I think, I'm looking forward to seeing more come through the pipeline, particularly with high quality clinical evidence. I think that's always going to be key when it comes to identifying which technologies are actually going to be valuable and which are going to have the greatest impact. But I think it's an exciting space to watch. And even with the therapies that are already available, the impact could be significant. Our second story comes to us from Healthtech World, and that is graphene spike mat and magnet technology to fight antibiotic resistance. Belle, you've been super looking forward to this one, I can tell, so I'm going to let you introduce the story and tell everyone what's actually happening here and what's interesting about it.
Yes, you know what they say, once a chemist, always a chemist. So I see the word graphene and my little chemistry antenna stand to attention. This story is really cool. So graphene is essentially an interesting structure of carbon. So it's where you have single layers of carbons bonded covalently against each other, forming a very flat 2D sheet, and then these sort of layer up. So that would form graphite. So graphite is in a pencil. I know, Huw, you said earlier that your favorite thing is how they discovered graphene, which is that they used some sellotape on a graphite pencil lead, pulled it off, and then a single layer came off, and that is graphene. So graphene, because of the way it's bonded, has very interesting properties. It has good electrical conductivity, lots of very cool things, and scientists are always trying to do great stuff with graphene. Can you blame them? But according to this article, one of the more interesting things about it is that it has the potential to be bactericidal. And so scientists are trying to work out how they can use graphene to incorporate kind of antibacterial properties onto health instruments like catheters, implants, things like that in a health setting, in order to reduce the likelihood of infection in hospitals, and as a result, the increase in antibiotic resistance that we're seeing often from kind of hospital-based infections and things like that. So what scientists have been trying to do is coat these kind of surfaces with graphene. But one of the problems or difficulties that they've come up to from now is how do they coat it properly? Because what they're trying to do is not coat it with a single layer, as you might imagine, but the way that they infer bacterial properties is they basically cut it up into lots of different flakes and make all the flakes stand upright. So you have lots of spikes coating your product. And it's those spikes which essentially kill the bacteria when it jabs them, which is very physical. I quite like it. It's like those, when you did Roman history and you had to learn the different formations of the Romans with their shields and arrows. What they're trying to do is get the graphene flakes to stand on end at 90 degrees, perpendicular to the surface that they're coating it in, and form this sort of jabby, technical term, coating that kills the bacteria. And up till now, that's been the difficulty. But what scientists have done, which I think is pretty cool and makes sense when you consider what kind of properties graphene is associated with often, is use a magnetic technique to get graphene to kind of assimilate in a certain way. So they're using this particular technique called the Halbach array, whereupon they use magnetic field, which is very strong on one side and very weak on the other. And in doing so, you can basically get all the flakes to go floof and stand upright. So that is the summary of the story. I think it's really cool. And what's really nice about this as well is this technique has loads of applications. Obviously, healthcare and medical instruments are one, but actually getting graphene to assimilate in the structure that you want it to is just something which is going to be very useful, not just for where you want spiky surfaces, but where you want certain conductivity and magnetic effects and things like that as well. So watch this space.
I mean, I'm convinced it's exciting. You've persuaded me. I do worry slightly that we've allowed chemistry to weasel its way into the health tech pigeon as a
How
topic,
dare
but
you?
that's absolutely fine. I mean, there's a couple of interesting points here for me. One, I guess, which is, this is very interesting. I guess a lot of the kind of medical devices that they talk about, the catheters, pieces like that, have been using, materials like silver and other metals and
Yeah.
elements with, I guess, antimicrobial properties. Is this going to be, more effective? Is this going to address the challenges any better than those technologies? Do you think?
Well, I don't actually know. Kind of obviously silver's antibacterial. I don't know kind of to what percentage they would say it kills bacteria. What they are saying in this is that this new graphene-oriented surface kills 99.9% of bacteria that try to attach to it. So that's pretty high. I would imagine it's working obviously in a different way to silver. And I guess the idea here is that it's very flexible. It's not cheaper yet, I imagine. Obviously, silver's a more expensive metal, but you can make a silver coating probably far cheaper than bringing loads of magnets in and doing very cool stuff and getting graphene to stand on end. So I think this is also a case of as technology comes down, there might be a cost element at play as well, whereupon it becomes cheaper than rarer metals such as silver. Who knows? I mean, I'd love to see more work into this because there's also, whenever you hear like flakes on a surface, there's also going to be the worries of, well, what if said flake were to unattach into my body and things like that. So there's going to be questions surrounding this as well, and definite health and safety concerns, which need to be clarified and researched before this is finding its way into a healthcare setting. But I think still exciting.
And that, I think, is the second interesting point, isn't it? On graphene generally, if it is by most measures a completely two-dimensional surface, so it'd be interesting to understand, what those potential impacts are. I'm very very optimistic about this, but just from, I guess, my understanding of graphene since I first heard about it, is this the first time it could be actually useful? Wasn't it one of those materials that the academic world went nuts over when it was first revealed, and they've spent a decade, or if not more, trying to find an actual use for it in the end?
It does feel a bit like that, doesn't it? I think it has such unique properties compared to other kind of carbon-based materials. It's like, whoa, carbon is so useful and carbon-based materials are so useful that surely graphene's got a use. Surely. So they've just spent this long trying to work out what that could be. But yeah, I think they say in this article that the new orientation technology shows potential in other areas, such as batteries, supercapacitors, sensors, and water-resistant packaging materials. So it might be that this sort of opens the gates for graphene finally being of use across multiple areas as well.
Well done, scientists.
You found it.
It's surely not the longest between something being discovered and it being found to be useful in a scientific discovery, but it's got to be up there.
And it has a great sellotape-based origin story, which we can all hope for.
Exactly. If you're interested in hearing more about graphene, there are some very interesting websites that cover it in more detail. Do go looking. And with that, on to our third and final story. Our final story comes to us from techexplorist.com. And that is that brain activity patterns could help identify mental health markers. Scientists at Yale have released a study where they believe they found 3 common brain activity patterns in many people. And this could be used in the future to understand brain patterns that are linked to common mental health disorders and help us identify and treat them and measure them as part of that as well. So the study used scans from 337 young adults to capture brain activity. And as the article puts it, similar to breaking down dance into simple moves.
That was my favourite bit.
Yeah, mine too. Looked at the brain during rest to see how brain activity changed over time. The plan was to find reliable brain activity patterns linked to human behaviour. Brain activity is very complex, can vary, and researchers wanted to use that to see whether the same patterns existed across different people. So, I mean, this is a fascinating article. I think if there can be brain biomarkers and biomarkers which could indicate mental health, particular mental health conditions, or that people are living or experiencing those mental health conditions, this could be a very interesting study. And I don't think it's the first time we've seen reference to brain biomarkers in a study or in a potential capability over the last year. But it's very interesting data. Scans from 337 young adults. I mean, probably would need to see, I guess, larger cohorts and larger study data to understand whether there's more applicability, and a bit more dive into this, sort of identify what biomarkers mean, what conditions as well. But I think ultimately that it does raise the question of could we make the measurement of mental health conditions more precise and more accurate? A lot of mental health is still recorded based on patient-reported outcomes at the moment, and I think any numbers or any way we can quantify what people actually experience through biomarkers will be very valuable. Belle, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think also as well, the time taken to get to a diagnosis is obviously not short when it comes to mental health disorders. So again, having something measurable just adds that extra piece of evidence to help when making a diagnosis, which I think is going to be invaluable in the future. As I said, my favorite bit was the comparison to dance moves, but I genuinely think it's a really interesting one, because if you think about, you to analyze mine, yours, and however many other people's dancing, and you realize that we all do a certain number of shuffles and things, that's all well and good. But if you then know that everyone with PTSD, for example, does a little star jump here and there, then it's genuinely really helpful to know exactly what you're looking out for. So I think it's really interesting, and it puts into perspective exactly what we mean when we talk about brain biomarkers, because the word biomarkers is used in so many different ways. Like a biomarker could be, an actual biological thing you're looking for in DNA. It could be, like you say, brain activity here. There's so many different things it could be. And I think to people who aren't working in the health space, I think it's one of those words where it's a bit like, but what does that mean? I'm not quite sure. And actually saying we're looking for a star jump amongst all the people dancing kind of gives a really nice way of being like, oh, okay, I get it. It's just that thing that I'm looking for to measure. And I know that if I measure that, it's likely that it means X. So yeah, I enjoyed that element of it. But I thought it was a really nice way of kind of personifying what can be quite a kind of complicated terminology. But yeah, I agree with you. Any evidence is good when it comes to
you live in you live and work healthcare communications, don't you? When you see an article like this and addressing some of these, the potential and the study data, and you think, I liked the analogy. I liked how it broke it down for me. And to be fair, they have done a very nice job on this one. Also, to your point, if you analysed my dance moves, no one will analyse my dance moves because no one will see them. There's some other kind of quite nice, I guess, tidbits from this article as well. The study found that while all participants showed similar brain patterns, there were differences between individuals. Some people spent more time in certain brain states or switched between states differently. These patterns could show both common behaviours and personal differences. And I would be very, very, the researchers say they want to apply the method that they've used on this study to study psychiatric disorders, and as we talked about, look at biomarkers. But I do think it would be very interesting to look at neurodivergence through this lens as well.
I agree. That's what it made me think of as well. When it said switching between different brain states, it definitely made me think of that.
I'd love to, I'd love to explore and understand, I guess if they'd linked with the young people in that study to diagnoses of neurodivergence and ADHD versus dyslexia, dyspraxia, and those bits, to see, whether there was any link or whether there were any similarities among those cohorts. But I'm sure that will be part of the plan and will come next. Exciting research to follow. So looking forward to seeing where it goes.
Yeah, I think nice just to put some evidence to things that people speak of, like you say, states. They speak of brains feeling and acting in a certain way, especially if you do have a mental health condition or if you have some neurodivergence. It will just be really interesting to start to see that in data. I'm really, really fascinated by it.
Absolutely. Well, that was our favourite health tech stories of the week. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a really good conversation, and thanks to everyone for listening. You can find the stories we've discussed as well as some of the best podcasts, events and jobs in health tech in the newsletter. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.